Square Enix asked a question that I can assure you is going to be very difficult for longtime fans of both franchises to answer, and that was, did they prefer Persona or Final Fantasy? Now this is a whole red pill, blue pill type of deal, because these are two franchises that have been long running within the role-playing game genre. Not just that, but both of them have very loyal fan bases. You figure each has a bunch of entries, though Final Fantasy obviously has significantly more than Persona, but still Persona has a lot of entries nonetheless. Now, I looked at this question, and this was mainly concerning Final Fantasy 15 and Persona 5. This whole questionnaire, and this question was actually in the middle of a survey. So it wasn't just an outright just going to ask us and that's the entire basis of it. This was nestled right in the middle of it. And this is on Japanese websites, so they haven't translated this to English to ask anybody outside of Japan. Now, the source for this had brought up the whole thing of the release dates and how they don't really want to go and butt heads with direct competition, which would be the smartest thing that you can do. Anytime that you're creating a game, you have to look at the release dates of every other game that's coming out at that point in time to ensure that you don't end up fucking yourself over. And that's very easy to do if you're bringing out a game that is going to end up garnering the attention of like-minded fans. So that would just kind of just bury your own product unnecessarily just because of shitty timing on your own part. But then this made me start thinking a little bit deeper about the question and about both franchises and hell, about both companies being Atlus and Square Enix. Which franchise do I prefer over the other? Which game am I actually more excited about? And I thought about that quite a bit. I thought more about which franchise I prefer over the other, and I came to this conclusion. For me personally, if you asked me a long time ago, without a shadow of a doubt, it would be Final Fantasy. That's what I had grown up with. I had Final Fantasy IV, Final Fantasy VI, Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy Tactics. I was just loving that series so much. And that was at its apex, in my opinion. You know, we got 8 and 9, 10 fantastic entries, but I always thought the ones I had just brought up were better. I ended up liking them more, whether it was the story or the world or the battle mechanics, whatever it was. I ended up liking those games just a tad bit more. Not to say I didn't enjoy the other titles, because I did, very much so. Just, those ones to me were the best. Now, then, if you ask me currently, 2015, going in 2016, do you prefer Final Fantasy or Persona? It's Persona. That's really the truth. I say Persona based purely off of this. Persona, in its main series, being Persona 1 through 4, and each entry has gotten better. The franchise has only been better with Persona 2 coming out into two parts, being split into Innocent Sin and Eternal Punishment. Persona 3 coming out, which that seemed to be the jumping on point for a lot of current fans right now, which I always say, please go back and play the first two because you are doing yourself a disservice by not playing them. But Persona 3 and Persona 3 FES, and the Persona 3 that's on PlayStation Portable, but I never got to play the PSP version, so, you know. But played both of those, Persona 4, then Persona 4 Golden. I'm just going to toss in Persona Q for shits and giggles. But the main series, it's just gotten better. Final Fantasy, it wavers. Here and there. You know, some things are better here, some things are better there. This entry is really good, this entry is really not all that great. You know, it's kind of all over the place. And there's been a lot more changes applied to the Final Fantasy brand than there have been with Persona. Persona is essentially the same exact kind of game ever since it started as Revelations Persona back on PlayStation 1. We're still getting the same style of game, you know, a lot more fine-tuned and much prettier, obviously, and just done up, you know, to the fucking nines, but this is something that obviously has learned from the past and just gotten better. So time's been good to it. It's aged very well, and Persona 5, Persona 5 looks like it's honestly going to be potentially even better than the past year, and that's kind of a tall order considering how highly I regard Persona 4 and Persona 2. But this looks like it's well on its way to be better, or at least as good. I believe that it'll deliver in spades like nobody's business, but you have to be curious about later Final Fantasy entries. Will Final Fantasy 15 live up to the years of waiting? I mean, we remember that this game used to be Final Fantasy 13 Versus. It used to be a completely different title. And then, lots of changes, lots of waiting, lots of changes. Did it become Vaporware? Oh, it's still being made. Here's a playable demo so you can at least get a brief understanding and a feel for what this game is going to play at. Granted, it didn't give us anything in terms of story, which is always my main go-to when it comes to Japanese RPGs, is the story. First and foremost. Characters, story, world, all that shit. I love that the most. Everything else for me personally is secondary. So I don't know if Final Fantasy 15 is going to be the shit, but I've gotten to see storyline aspects of Persona 5, and I'm pretty damn happy with what I've seen so far. But this is one of those questions, it's difficult to answer, and that's the truth. You know, do you like this over this? And playing favorites is always going to be difficult when you're such a big fan of both. I've been playing Persona for years. I've been playing Final Fantasy for years, and I love both franchises to death. I mean, I've talked about both here on this channel more times than I can count. Yeah, but it's odd to think that Square Enix would bring that up. To bring up your direct competition, you know, is saying something. You figure right now, when it comes to the JRPG genre, period, there's 3 franchises that are going to come to mind, at least in this current gen, and that's Persona, Final Fantasy, and the Tales series. Those are riding high as being like the coup de grace, the fucking trifecta of go-to RPGs in terms of franchises. And again, each one of these franchises has been around for years and years and years. Revelations Persona, Final Fantasy on NES, again, fucking long-ass time. And then Tales of Destiny. Going on forward. You know, it's crazy to think that we're this far along. I mean, how many entries into the Tales series are we? I mean, there's like a fucking gajillion of them. I love that franchise to death, though. I've played so damn many of them. Tales of the Abyss, Tales of Vesperia, Tales of Xillia, Tales of Destiny 2. Those are some of my favorites. You know, it kind of blows my mind how good they are. You know, the first time I got to play Tales of Symphonia, I was just like... You know, I got to play that, and it's like, man, this is so fucking great. Then Skies for Arcadia gave me even more greatness. I was like, I love all this. Thank you, Nintendo GameCube. Good shit right there. But thinking about comparing Persona to Final Fantasy, and this is brought up by Square Enix, it's interesting to think about. You know, did they ask this question to get a better understanding of why people are so interested in that series? Because it's only been growing. It hasn't gotten stagnant, you know, it hasn't capped off, it hasn't hit that glass ceiling. It's still on a very steep incline. You know, we're seeing anime adaptations, we're seeing manga adaptations, we're starting to see this hit the mainstream. You know, they have the Persona fighting game, the Persona dancing game. You know, now they're starting to expand their horizons because the franchise obviously has a lot more to offer than people initially had thought. I mean, if you had told anybody who was into playing Revelations Persona way back in the day, somebody like me, that Persona would be getting as big as it is right now, I'd scoff and I'd fucking laugh at you. Get the fuck out of here. There's no way. But here it is. Final Fantasy, on the other hand, you know, it peaked with 7. It's kind of the truth. You know, a lot of people argue, well, Final Fantasy 11 technically has more sales. But yeah, you have to pay monthly for that shit. Trust me, initial individual sales for it by comparison to Final Fantasy VII, which they haven't included things like the PSN sales, the Steam sales, the PC sales, and now like fucking PS4, just holy shit, there are so many game sales that they don't have accounted for. And yeah, how many has it sold worldwide just on PlayStation 1? What, 12, 13 million? You know, and for back then, that was insanity. Nowadays, you can find plenty of games that can hit those kind of numbers. I mean, Fallout 4 just recently ended up making the most fucking money and selling the most shit within a 24-hour period, breaking all sorts of records previously held by Activision and Call of Duty. But for Final Fantasy for Square Enix, FF7 has been the go-to. That was 1997. Now we're looking into the future of the series, and we're getting an episodic Final Fantasy VII, which has been met with people who have been criticizing it and people who have been saying that this is great. So you have this strange divide going on about it, but with Persona 5, you just have people that are excited. With Final Fantasy 15, you have a lot of people worried about the direction of an open world setting and an very, very action-oriented battle system. Persona, still the same old Persona. You see that? They've stayed the same, and they've just been adding things here and there. Final Fantasy has tried changing all sorts of different things, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, because you have to go and take risk to find out whether or not this is going to make the series better. And especially whenever you've got a creative team who wants to go and try different things. You figure they don't want to just relegate themselves to doing the same exact thing that they have for years and years and years, entry after entry after entry, and I can understand something like that. So they want to try to go and blow it up and make it bigger and better. Is that something that fans will want and embrace? That remains to be seen until the product goes out on the store shelves and people get to try it firsthand, rather than just judging it based off of screenshots and videos alone. Saying that, oh, it's complete shit. Is it actually complete shit? Did you get to try it out? Did you get to play it? Did you hear the music? Did you get to see any of the storylines? Get to see any of the characters? Get to see anything? No? Then how the fuck do you know? But better than the other. It's interesting. Maybe the folks at Square Enix are starting to realize they aren't top dog anymore, and that they've been losing their position as the go-to brand. I mean, they still have the name recognition, and they still are going to get those sales, but they can see that there's other companies, like Atlus, like Bandai Namco, that are biting at their ankles and their boot heels to go and climb that mountain and to sit atop it on a throne as king of the role-playing game genre. Granted, they probably won't be Fallout, because Fallout just fucking crushed everything in its wake, but, it's fucking Fallout. But still, in terms of Japanese RPGs, yeah, those are the brands to go with. But for me, currently, I will say that I feel that Persona is a better brand overall, but Final Fantasy has also taken a lot more chances, a lot more risks, a lot more ballsy moves that most companies aren't going to want to just go into uncharted waters and go with something that's unfamiliar to them. So here and there, that had worked out for them, and then other times it didn't so much. There's a lot of polarizing opinions about various entries in the series. Lots of people love Final Fantasy VIII. Lots of people hate Final Fantasy VIII. Lots of people hate Final Fantasy XIII. It's got a marginal amount of people that think it's a fantastic series and a really great trilogy. I am not part of that group whatsoever. And this isn't even including any of the offshoot titles, the online titles, any of the tactics games, the Final Fantasy Dissidia games, and there's so many things that include Final Fantasy with just the characters, the worlds, all sorts of shit. But with the main series, it's just up and down, all over the place. But for all of you out there, if you had to pick, if you had to really sit down, and don't just play favorites off the top of your head. I mean, really think about it. Think about playing every entry of each franchise. What would you consider to be the superior product? Final Fantasy or Persona? If you were more hyped about something, would it be Final Fantasy 15 or Persona 5? For all of you out there, I'm curious, because I know that there's a lot of RPG fans who watch my channel, and because, I've talked about it 1,000,001 fucking times. I know, and I've talked to people in the comment section about this shit, so I know damn well there's a lot. But for all of you out there, Persona or Final Fantasy? Which will it be? I feel like this needs to be like an episode of Celebrity Deathmatch. Anyway, this is AlphaOmegaSin, as always, nerds, nerdettes, and gamers game the fuck on!